So the next video will be on how to prepare the pieces and assemble everything together, the stitching and everything. Now, as a beginner, you don't necessarily need the fanciest tools. You can start with some basics. So I'll take you through the options that you have. The basics you can start with, a little bit how to use the basics, and also how to use what other tools you have available, which is what I'm using most of the time. So the first thing is that we want to start smoothing the edges. You can see there's a little bit of hair showing here after it's been cut. Now you can also skive, the leather that is to make it thinner. But this leather is really thin, so I'm not going to skive this type of leather. You can do that though, but I'm not going to show that today. So what we want to do is just look at this holistically before we start assembling, because we need to do a bit of planning on the steps. So it's important to have the sequence right here, because some of the steps you can only do in the beginning, and some you can only do later. So it's important that we start with the planning before we start with anything. Now you would see this is the front part, and this will go over here like that, and this will be the inside flap, and these are the card slots for the inside. And then we have this one that will go outside, and it will close like that. Okay, so next is we're going to talk about the tools and what you need as the basics to at least get going. So the first thing is your material scissor. Now I use this to cut the thread, so that you will need for stitching. And this is the wax thread I'm going to use. It's quite a thick wax thread, but it's really nice and strong, and you will feel that it's got a waxy feel to it. You would need 2 needles for the stitching. I'll get to that part. And then for the edges, these are the simple tools that you can use. So this is just like a buffing tool, the thing that I have. I use that for the edges if I don't have anything, anything expensive. That's a basic tool that you need. And I normally use this, when I want to polish the edges or just smooth it a bit. And this I add after the Tokonol. Now Tokonol is what I prefer using. It's got a very nice smoothness. I like the way it sits on the leather. It really works well for me, but there are other options you can use as well. Some people add a bit of water with just wood glue, so that's an option to use, or you can use plain water. You can, for the back side of the leather, I sometimes use wallpaper paste mixed with some water. It creates a sort of a jelly texture, but that works well, especially if I have big pieces. And I mean, this is quite expensive, so to use that for a big part of the leather it works a little bit too expensive for me, but other than that, it works really well for me. The other option you can use for the edges is also a Dremel tool. I will show you that a little bit later, how I use that versus the basics. And I bought an adapter for the Dremel as well to polish it. and that's also quite nice to use. It's but for me a bit quicker. It really polishes it very nicely. So the next thing that you need is this just a sharp knife. Now I use this for scrubbing, or scratching the leather where it's going to be glued. That is just to ensure that it sticks better to the leather. If it's too smooth, it won't stick that well. So that's what I use this for. And then you would need your punches. So this is a diamond stitching prong set. I normally use this one and the two set. I don't always use this one because of the wallets that's smaller. Now you would either use this with a hammer, which is either a rubber hammer or a mallet. You don't use a steel hammer with this. And this you can use also with a press drill or a big tool if you have it. I have one here. I'll show you a little bit later how I use it. But you can use that instead of using the hammer, because with the hammer it's quite noisy. It also works on your wrists and your arms, so that's an option as well, is to punch the holes. And then there's also an awl that you will need, and that is to mark certain things. So you will see the majority of the stuff has already been marked because of the engraving tool, but I do use this just to mark a few things that's not marked with the machine. The next thing you would need is, I have this little cord thread burner. Now you can use a normal lighter as well. You don't need this fancy tool, but this works well for me. You would also need a ruler, steel ruler. So this is also just to mark a few things. So I always have that on hand. And you would need a press stud set for the bottom and the top parts of the press. The holes that you're going to punch, and that would need to go in there. So that you would need, and also a tool to punch it. Now I have this prim tool that I use, but again, you don't have to use it. You can just use a tool set like this to punch it as well. So that is there. You also need one of these hole punch sets. Also, you don't necessarily need this specific one. You can also use a hole punch set that you hit with the hammer. So that's also an option. And you also need glue. Now you can use different, as long as it's a contact adhesive. I'm using Gemchem at the moment, but there's different contact adhesives that you could use. I just tried this in a container with an applicator, which works a little bit better for me. And also a nice to have, but not necessarily necessary, is one of these stitching ponies. Now I've worked without one for a long time. I only recently got this one, so you can easily work without one. I guess it just makes it easier to do your stitching. So yeah, so let's start with the next step, and that is where we're going to start with assembling everything.